The problem usually doesn't start in the workshop. It starts on paper. You look at a cut list, and everything seems straightforward. A few boards, some measurements, nothing complicated. It feels like the easiest part of the project. Almost mechanical. Measure, cut, move on. But then something subtle begins to go wrong. You make your first cuts, then the next. Everything looks clean, precise. You're moving fast, confident. But when it's time to assemble, pieces don't quite align. A joint is slightly off. A panel is just a bit too short. Not enough to understand immediately, but enough to create friction. So you adjust. Maybe you sand a little more. Maybe you force a joint to fit. Maybe you convince yourself it'll work out later. It doesn't. Because the issue isn't in the way you cut. It's in what you were told to cut. This is where most people get stuck, not because they lack skill, but because they trust the list in front of them. A cut list looks authoritative. It feels final. But in many cases, it's disconnected from the actual build sequence. It doesn't account for blade kerf, material thickness variation, joinery depth, or assembly order. It treats every measurement as isolated, when in reality, every cut depends on the previous one. So what happens? A 1/16-inch discrepancy on one piece becomes a visible gap across a full panel. A slightly incorrect length forces alignment issues that compound as you build. And by the time you notice it clearly, the mistake is already locked into multiple parts. Now you're not fixing one piece, you're compensating across the entire project. That's where frustration builds. You double-check your tools. You remeasure. You question your technique. And the more careful you try to be, the more confusing it becomes. Because the source of the problem isn't your execution. It's the structure behind the instructions. Most cut lists are created as static outputs. They show what pieces should exist, but not how those pieces interact during the build. They skip the relationship between parts. They ignore sequence. And they assume perfect conditions that rarely exist in a real workspace. It's like being given a list of ingredients without a recipe, and expecting a finished dish to come out right every time. So the real issue isn't that your cuts are inaccurate. The real issue isn't even that the numbers are slightly off. The real issue isn't your skill level. It's that the cut list isn't connected to a tested process. When a plan is actually built before being documented, something changes. Every measurement is validated in context. Every cut is made in sequence. Adjustments happen before the plan ever reaches you. The list becomes part of a system, not just a set of numbers. And that changes how you approach the project. Instead of second-guessing, you follow a path that's already been tested. Instead of compensating mid-build, you move from step to step with consistency. The focus shifts from figuring it out to simply executing. That doesn't make the work effortless, but it makes it predictable. And predictability is what most DIY builders are really missing. Because once you remove that uncertainty, something else happens. You stop hesitating before making a cut. You stop overthinking every measurement. You stop leaving projects unfinished in the corner of your garage. You start building with a sense that the outcome is already within reach, not something you have to fight your way into. If you want a deeper understanding of how structured plans change the entire building process, there's a breakdown linked in the description. It walks through how these plans are developed and why that process matters more than most people realize. And if this kind of thinking helps clarify what's been holding your projects back, you can subscribe to see more breakdowns like this. Because once you see where the problem actually starts, it becomes much easier to avoid repeating it.